Wrestling with Goals, the Conceive, Believe, and Achieve podcast,
where we delve into the minds of elite athletes and coaches to uncover their secrets behind their success. I'm your host, Sean Geris, former university wrestling coach, D1 wrestler, national champion, Olympic trials medalist, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, three-time world team coach in grappling, and author. Join me as we explore the realms of training, mindset, goal setting, overcoming adversity, and various coaching methodologies in the world of sports. Get ready to be inspired and motivated as we learn from the best in the game on our journey to achieving greatness.
Today's guest is a special one. We've got Dan Noble in the house from Noble Sports Performance. Dan, I want to tell you exactly how I got to get you on here. You came highly recommended by an individual, one of the top dogs in the business of strength training. In fact, he doesn't like being called a strength coach. I don't know if you know that for sure. But the last podcast we did, it was functional training. And he dropped your name. He says, you got to get a hold of this guy. And he said he's up in and around my area. And sure enough, here you are. We got you in here. But you've worked all over. You have a little background in sports. I want to talk about that first. Growing up, what was your... Well, welcome to the show first.
Oh, thank you very much, Sean. Appreciate you having me.
Okay. So what I want to do is, with everybody, I kind of talk about backgrounds. And from my understanding, you got into hockey when you were young as a result of the relationship you had with your father.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know how far you want me to go back, but so I was a super hyperactive kid, right? And probably, I don't know, ADHD before it was a thing, but I couldn't sit still. So my parents, I played every sport. So I played football, I played hockey, I played baseball and lacrosse pretty much all year round. And, it was anytime I was not playing a sport, I was usually getting into trouble. So that was kind of the trade-off, was that, I was always playing a sport. And my dad played in the OHL and had an opportunity to play, to try out for the NHL and didn't make it due to an injury, or at least that's how he told it to me, along with everybody else. But, so he had kind of pressured me heavily into hockey. And was a tenuous part of our relationship because, I had a love-hate relationship with the sport. So I actually left hockey after I didn't get drafted to the OHL and ended up playing football. It was a sport that I just loved the physicality of it, which I'm sure you can relate to in terms of wrestling and jiu-jitsu. But and also I love the fact that my dad didn't know anything about it. He could just be a fan, right? So so I ended up playing football at the University of Guelph for 5 years, and then went over, tried out for the CFL, was cut from every team and cut 20 times over, and actually ended my career playing in Italy, actually, funny enough, for 2 years. So sports journey is a little bit probably different than most, especially now with the amount of specialization, but was the I guess the ultimate generalist, I guess, to say, on that side of things.
Mm-hmm. So hockey puts a lot of demand on the body, obviously. Mm-hmm. I mean, growing up as you were young, you said was it the training or was it the relationship with the dad that kind of, and I know from wrestling, and I think we talked earlier, my dad was my coach. He was a 3-time Olympian for Canada. And of course, I remember the times training, and in my head, I was like, and I won't use any swear words, but there were swear words there, very descriptive adjectives. But, I can remember one time where I cussed him out in the middle of a match, and boy, did I feel it.
I've been there. We actually had that moment. You know what? I think, my dad, again, was, he was a minister, which not a lot of people realize. But and I think, when he left hockey, he didn't know what to do with himself, right? And I think it was a very, he came from a very traditional religious family, and they didn't really support him playing hockey. His dad never watched him play. He kind of rode the bus to get to his games, and it was all self-driven on his part. And I think, when he became a minister, his parents were like, that was kind of following his parents' path, that they're like, okay, well, now you're back, you've tried this hockey thing, you're back onto that piece. And and he was a phenomenal, obviously, just man in terms of just his desire to help people and, the type of man of faith he was. But I don't think I think if it was today, he probably would have taken a different route. Probably maybe something similar to what you're doing or what I'm doing. And so I think when it came to my sports journey, he was able to, be himself, whereas he was probably always having a little bit of having to put a different hat on when he walked into the church and not being able to be the person who he actually was and connecting with the world in the way that was meaningful for him. But, for me, that wasn't always great, like it's whereas, it was, and a lot of that passion probably came out misdirected at times and, was, forced shooting pucks. Most people had, like my bedroom when I grew up, from grade 6 on was I had a bed and then I had a bench press and a squat rack and then I it was a hockey stick handling station and my basement was set up as like a shooting rink and it was always if you're not doing something somebody else is getting better than you and the hard part was I actually wasn't very good at hockey I worked hard I was just average, right? And I think he always thought I could have practiced harder and done more and I think for me it created a little bit of contentiousness with that sport and it's funny that's why I walked away from hockey and hated the sport. And it's funny that now really my living comes within that sport. But actually that was the last I actually cussed him out from the ice one time as he was always the dad in the stands yelling of do this do that and it was like again, not to use choice language on the air, but we had our moment, and that's where we had to kind of come back to. But, and again, he, as most sports parents, I knew he loved me. And I just think, especially during that time period where he grew up, it probably didn't come out into the way that would be acceptable in today's age, right? But, such as an 80s kid and 90s kid grew up, we deal with that and try to be a little bit better with our kids and moving forward.
Yeah, my dad, he's passed on in 2008, but those times, even the tumultuous times, I really value them because I know that those were times that he was invested in me. He, not just through the sport, but emotionally too. He was there for me because. And I know now because he wanted to make me a better person. And I think that kind of transfers both. We talked about that prior to, I said that I have some similarities in your journey and my journey similar. So that was one of them, but there's a couple more too. We actually went to the University of Guelph too.
Oh, no way.
Right after my time at Eastern Michigan, I took a little bit of time off, got on the job here. And then when I was on the job, I wanted to learn more about actually street gangs. So I decided to go back and immerse myself in the criminology section of Guelph there. So
that's awesome. I actually took criminology, funny enough.
Yeah, so it's quite interesting to tell you the truth. So maybe we could talk a little bit more later about that. But so afterwards, you're talking about this relationship, and then you said you ventured into football, and it was something as a way to get away from the sport. I think that was something with me with jiu-jitsu. I wanted to get away and create my own identity. Is that what you were doing?
Yeah, and I mean, there was, I grew up in my household wasn't always the most peaceful household, and I've talked before, and I had a sister that struggled with substance abuse and mental illness, and and again, my dad being a minister, these types of things were like, how are you supposed to lead a church when you can't lead your own household? Or this is at least was the optics from that side. And there was just a lot of fighting, for me growing up. And a lot of anger probably in my side of things. I didn't do well in school. I had learning disabilities and behavioral issues. And, school was just a very a place of stress for me, and I was getting into a lot of fights and other stuff, and I felt like where football was the one place where I was allowed to be violent, and I know that is probably not okay to say, but at the time it was like I needed an outlet, and I also needed a purpose. I felt again, and it's interesting going through this, and you touched on it with your dad, is I have these my dad passed away, I think, 6 years ago now, and I have these cathartic moments of we spend so much time together in the cars and parking lots and arenas and basements and gyms, and I don't want to get emotional, but going through this with
no worries. Hey, I've been there.
Apologize.
I've been there. Don't worry about it.
Going through this with my own kids now. there's these crazy similarities and these moments where I feel like, you just like, you're in your dad's spot, right? And you're looking at your own kids and you're like,
Yep.
having this conversation of like, how can I approach this in a different way, and what did it mean? And now I'm also feeling what my dad was starting to feel. Maybe this is what he was going through, and I think about the stress that he was under and trying to manage my marriage and dealing with my sister at that time, and I had a brother as well too. But football was the place where I felt I had value. And even hockey, it was just, I was always a fourth liner. I was the guy who was blocking shots and working, and the guy always had to do more, where football was a place where I was like, I got an opportunity to be the man a little bit, and an opportunity where it's like everything kind of made sense, and I understood the sport. It flowed. Not everything felt like work, and I think that was just, he saw that too. As soon as I stepped onto that field, everything clicked, right? And I think that's something that, for you with jiu-jitsu and other things, it's like, to be able to find that thing that just makes you feel like, this is what I'm here, this is what I was supposed to do, is just like, it's powerful, and I know not everyone, relates to sports in that type of intensity, but for me, it's like, it's always been in my DNA, right? Like, this is just how we were, sports was our church to an extent, and for me, it was cathartic, it was healing, it was probably spiritual to a point, but if I didn't have that, I don't know where my life would have gone at that point.
Nobody ever teaches men how to control their emotions.
Yeah.
Nobody teaches us, they don't have that sit down with our father and like, hey, it's, you need some anger management here. We don't have that, but at least back in the day when I was growing up, we don't have that.
No.
And, I think it's really important to find some sort of outlet where you can release just that. It doesn't have to be aggression, but that emotion, because we don't know how to deal with it. I think that's ways that we actually push it out towards other things. And sometimes it's healthy, sometimes it's not healthy. But it can be a release that is definitely needed, especially when we never develop those skills. And I'm not saying that I think sports does a great job of that. It controls your emotion. I think, for me, because my sport was so aggressive, with wrestling, it really taught me, especially as I went over to policing, I can control just who I am, what I've done. I know that this threat in front of me is not as big as the threat that I faced over here at times. Because when you're wrestling with a 250-pound, 60-year-old, he's got arms like a gorilla. I mean, it's tough. That was my dad.
Yeah.
But yeah, that in itself, the aggression part, learning how to control it, I mean, it's part of sport in itself, right? Channeling that.
We interrupt this program to bring you an important announcement.
Looking for top-tier healthcare in the GTA? Look no further than the Core Optimum Health Center. Founded by Dr. Pat Graham, official chiropractor for the Toronto Blue Jays, their clinic offers a wide range of services, including physiotherapy, chiropractic care, acupuncture, massage therapy, naturopath, and more, all in a caring professional environment. They also are proud partners with the Shift Concussion Management Program, offering the latest concussion care and online neurocognitive impact testing at their Mississauga location. At the Core, your health is their priority. Visit the Core Optimum Health Center today and experience industry-leading care.
No, absolutely, and I think that's what the interesting part. Starting in high school, it was pure kind of raw aggression at first, and then all of a sudden you start to realize how to manage that. You start to learn how to be able to turn it off, right? And again, like you said, like it's realizing, when's it appropriate, when's it not appropriate too, on those side of things too, and I think that was a big part for me, knowing I wanted to go play in university and try to play pro. And I remember I had a teacher that was a huge, role model for me. Like, again, when family was kind of like in a rough spot, he was kind of a guy that stepped in and was kind of like, a third parent to me in that part. And he really kind of showed me of like, he's like, hey, like, you can go be this idiot that wants to hit people on the football field and then fight on Friday night and act like a jackass in the classroom. But this is all going to come to a quick stop, after grade 12 or grade 10 or grade 11. I said, or you can learn to manage this and understand of what appropriate behavior is. And this is something I think of, reason why I got into teaching and coaching of and I think it's missed right now in today's school board to a point, and is I just needed time, in terms to figure out what appropriate behavior was. I just had no idea. I had no idea how to act, right? I just was so responsive. And if someone did something to me, then 2 + 2 = 4, right? And I didn't process anything, right? And I think for me, a big part was that emotional intelligence and learning to deal with that. And so learning what was the appropriate response when someone wronged me, right? What was the appropriate, for me, again, I wasn't very smart in terms of school settings and I struggled. So I was always trying to protect myself in terms of, I never wanted to look dumb, and then when someone called me dumb, it was like my hair stood up, up on, I don't have much hair anymore, but at the time, it was, I always think back to Michael J. Fox in Back to the Future when someone called him, are you scared? When he called that, and it just it was like a call to action for me. And, but then starting to realize, people's words and actions don't have to dictate my response, and that I can be in control of my actions. I can be in control of my emotions. And again, that was football, because in football, different than any other sport, if I take a penalty in football, it's a massive deal. You take a penalty in hockey, it's 2 minutes, you come off, it happens, right? You take a penalty in football, you may not go back on the field, right? And so you do something stupid that's emotional and in that time. And I think that's the piece people miss about football, is how tactical it is and how much thought goes into it. And so I think for me, that was a really big learning moment for me, of being able to figure out that my actions have consequences, and it doesn't matter what other people do to me, is that I have to control the response, and that's all I can. And really, at the end of the day, I can manage, and it doesn't matter what else happens. It's just what my response is.
As a player, you don't realize there's teachable moments.
Yeah.
As a coach, you start to realize there's teachable moments. You're talking about how sport transfers over to life. And people, I don't think they get it some days. People, especially people that aren't involved in sports, they look at it as something silly. Let's see, in an arena, it's on a field. The people are playing that. What the heck's? I don't get any thrill out of watching that or whatever. But it is a big, lesson for people. And I've found so many lessons myself in, perseverance. And I'm sure you're the same way.
Oh, big time. I come back to, our training camp. I probably had the last year of when football was just there was no rules around training camp in university. There was no protection for the athletes. My first year at Guelph, we had 3 days, which sounds insane to say. So our day would start at 6 a.m. Practice starts at 6 a.m. So you're up at 4:30 for breakfast at 5, and if you need taped or treatment or whatever, you had to get that in before practice started. And then the second practice was after lunch at 1 o'clock, and then the third practice was at 7 o'clock, and every practice was contact. And it was it was insane. In every practice, you were on that fringe of a coach putting you on the goal line, we're running, or we're hitting with no warm-ups, right? It's just coach wants to send a message, that whistle blows, it's your heart stops. What's coming here, right? And you had to be there was no activation. There was just hey, how you're either tough enough to handle this or you can't. And it was interesting. It was there was never any cuts made in football. We used to call it the phantom. So you'd wake up in the morning, and we'd all stay in these dorm rooms, and you'd walk out for breakfast, and guys would just be gone. Mm-hmm. And we say the phantom got them. In the middle of the night, they'd get up and leave. They'd pack their bags after everyone else had gone to bed because they were too embarrassed to face anyone. And it was just and literally all we would do is I remember I had one of my best friends growing up was on the team with me. He's actually a police officer in Mississauga. And we just say, one more day, right? He's you get up and you survive one more day. It wasn't even about starting playing time. It was just it was survival, right? Yeah. And I think about that now, and it's having my own company now and being like extremely busy, and I've got a lot of different roles, and people are like, how do you do this? And I was like, it's one more day, man. Just wake up, right? And I was like, and it's like, this is what I have to do today, right? Like there's no room to complain, there's no room to whine. Like I'm like, this is what I have to do today, and it's, to me, it's the same, right? Like it's that same response, and I think that's something, this maybe generation of the world is missing right now, that ability to like, and I'm a huge mental health advocate, but at the same time, for me, like, and again, like I struggled with depression once my dad passed away, and there's points where like, I thought many times about just driving my car off the road, when things got too heavy, and I was trying to take care of my mom and all this stuff, and everything felt overwhelming to a big point. But it was like, I was like, hey, like, okay, this is how I feel. I can't control what all the stuff that's making me feel like this, but I can control of getting up and like, hey, like, I've got to show up and be at my best here. And I remember I had a coach one day, he's like, he always talked about creating these boundaries around performance, and it's something that I've applied to all aspects of my life. He's like, when you step onto the football field, and I was a very emotional being growing up and a kid, and so like, if I got into a fight with my parents, or if I broke up with a girlfriend, or something happened along the way, I would always take that stuff and it would affect the way I played. And I could never separate it. And so he just says, like, the minute you step into those white lines, he's like, that stuff doesn't exist anymore. And he's like literally do a physical wipe of that. Like, you just wipe it off, you step in, and that's where your focus is. And that would be, when my dad died of cancer, and so my brother lived in Calgary, and my sister actually, unfortunately now lives, downtown, and still struggles with substance abuse and in and out of the streets. And so she wasn't there, and it was like, so it was me supporting my mom, and my dad was in the hospital at Guelph. So I would drive every day, I'd sleep in a bed beside him. I'd get up at 5 a.m, drive back to work in Toronto. And I'd work, and I'd be like, and I would want to come to work, and I'd be like, I want to throw myself this pity party that my dad, my hero, is dying, but at the same time, these people don't really care, right? Like, and I think, death and whatever, you lose a job, you get cut from a team, everyone shows a certain amount of sympathies, but they don't really care, right? Like, everyone's got to move on, everyone's got their own shit that they're dealing with. And I just said, I was like, okay, like, as soon as I walk through those doors, I'm coach, right? Like, and coach doesn't get to have baggage today, right? Like, you've got to give your athletes the same energy, the same time, the same patience, the same opportunities, and that's my job. And when I walk out of here today, then I deal with my shit, right? I deal with the sadness, the pain, the frustration, the tiredness, fatigue. But that's just always been my mentality of like trying to like say, I'm not going to bury stuff, but I'm going to recognize when I don't have to deal with this, and I can just be a coach, or I can be a dad, or I can be a husband, or I can be a guy that just needs to sit and process, shit and clear my head and whatever I got to do those things.
Yeah. I'm listening to you talk. So much love for your dad there. It's amazing. I think part of the thing too is people get really uncomfortable, and this is what I found, when people start to talk about doom. Death. Nobody wants to hear about it, or they do. They want to say my condolences, but they don't know how to respond to it. And for me, it was always when I talked about my dad, or even still when I talk about my dad, I'm so proud of the fact of who he is and who he was, and I see that in you, which is awesome and amazing. And I'm glad that you were able to share that. That I didn't know about yourself. I thought because I've listened to a few of your podcasts that you've done here and there. And I did know just how important he was, and that's for the same thing with me. How important my dad was as well. So just want to say, awesome on you that you're still bringing his memory out here. Because when we forget, the memory dies. You keep them alive by talking about them when you do that, or do things and you remember them. And they're such amazing individuals. They're so influential. I don't want to get you much emotional again. What I wanted to talk to you, I was going to ask you, Blake Marshall, was he your coach or one of your coaches?
No, so Blake Marshall I think he was at McMaster.
That's right. Sorry, I'm confusing. Sorry.
Yeah, but no, I knew Blake well, and he actually he actually gave me one of my first tryouts at the Hamilton Ticats. Okay. It was a disaster, but he's a good man. Okay. But it was pretty funny that tryout. I think I got hit harder that tryout ever that I've in my life. I thought my spine came out of my body.
Yeah.
He's like, maybe you want to try something else. But it was. I appreciate. He's a good man.
Yeah. Okay. I just wanted, because I just had that brain fart. I'm thinking, Blake Marshall, because he was a London boy.
Yeah.
And that's where I was born and raised in London, Ontario.
But I think Blake played at Guelph though. I think he played at Guelph, and there's brothers Greg, and there's a whole bunch of them.
Yeah.
But
and that's where I think the confusion came.
Tough as nails.
Yeah. It's easy to confuse me, so don't.
No,
please don't try. So after the athletic career, you get into coaching. With the University of Guelph, you're coaching which positions?
So I went over and played football in Italy for a couple of years, and and again, it's funny. Like I tried to. My son actually just played his first year of football this year, which reluctantly, like I didn't want him to do this, and he's become obsessed with the sport that I tried to not have him fall in love with, and my wife is not happy with this either. But I loved that game, and it haunted me for well into my 20s, right? Like I would sleep with a football until I got married, like it was just all I wanted to do. But when I got to Italy, I was able to have closure. Like it just kind of felt like it was like, okay, I'm done.
Mm-hmm.
I had a lot of concussions, and it was just my body was broken, and so I remember sitting up in we lived in a beautiful spot in a little town called Bergamo. I remember sitting out in this lookout and just thinking, I was like, what's next? And I had this extreme sense of gratitude, that I've got, that sports had allowed me to take me around the world and do stuff, and that I just made it, because I wasn't supposed to be here, and I don't think no one ever thought I would make it there. I didn't think I would make it to where I was, and to me at that time, that gratitude just drove me. I was like, I just want to give back. The two things I loved were coaching and teaching, and so I started applying to teachers college, and wasn't getting in anywhere because my grades weren't good enough in university at the time, and so I ended up coaching. My former coach at the time invited me to coach defensive line with him at the University of Guelph, and I did that for 3 years, just before my dad got sick, and it just became too much, of a commitment. But so I was there for 3 years, and it was an awesome intro into like coaching, and just what it can offer, and the kind of high, I call it the coaching high, that came with it. And it was probably my first kind of step into like I would love to find a way to do this in some context for a living.
Yeah. So what was the biggest lesson at Guelph as a coach, or as an athlete, I guess? What was it for you? Maybe a coach.
Yeah, I think as a coach, it was really, when I first came into it, like I think I was trying to be the rah guy, and I was highly motivated, probably a little bit undereducated, and I think I just realized, and Vern Gambetta, actually, who was a guest on your podcast, was a big part of this once I met him, of like the responsibility that comes with being a coach, especially when you're somebody that can relate with a lot of different people, is that people trust you, right? And if you ask them to do something, like you need to be prepared that they may do it, and if they get hurt, or something doesn't go well, there's a responsibility and accountability that comes with that. And I think at first I was, I was looking at things through a lens of probably, movies and just hype and just fluff. And then I started surrounding myself with some really good people, and how much time goes into planning and preparation and understanding. And then, the difference between, being a coach that it just coaches everyone the same way, and then the coach that is able to, understand what drives each individual and how they can have these connections. And I think one of my coaches there, Stu Lang, who I worked under there, was the head coach when I was there, and he would make time. He used to do this thing where every lunch he would sit with a different player, and it would have these individual touches of getting to know people and just asking questions, hearing about their families, and just he would put so much time into just getting to know the athlete and the relationship first, and then as well as just he would be the first one to clean up equipment off the field. He would be the last one to leave the field, and his speeches were always just very planned and pointed, and just again, it wasn't wasn't this raw show. It was just like, he really lived out through service, and I just, that was new to me, to see coaches that led by example and led through service rather than words and actions, and making rookies clean up the bags, and rookies do this. And it was like, it's like, as leaders, if we want others to follow us, we need to lead to do the jobs that other people don't want to do, right? Because if the head coach is picking up stuff off the field or picking up water bottles and things like that, then you better believe the assistant coach is, and then you better believe that the captains are, and everybody. And so I think for me, that was a big learning moment of just like, coaching isn't about you, it's about others, and it's about what you can do for others and how much you can give back, and the type of platform that an environment you can create for others to become their best, and not about you being the best and you being at the center of attention. It's not about your ego or your accomplishments or accolades. It's about taking a bunch of individuals, giving them an opportunity to become the best that they possibly can, and contribute to the greater good of the team.
Mm-hmm. I like the way you put it.
That concludes part 1 of this episode. Part 2 will be released next week.
Thank you for tuning into the Conceive, Believe, and Achieve podcast. I hope you found today's episode insightful and inspiring. Your support means the world to us, so don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and leave a comment in the section below. Your feedback fuels our journey to bring you more valuable content and stories from the realm of sports. Until next time, keep pushing boundaries, believing in yourself, and achieving greatness. Thank you for listening.